Hey, what's up? My name is Tackless, and today I'm going to be doing a rather important or valuable tutorial on how to optimize your world. Now, what I mean by this is that some of you, especially if you're like me, you always are making worlds big enough that you're pushing the game to the absolute limits. So it lags, and it slows down, and it freezes up, and occasionally, just occasionally, you get the game to freaking crash. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you guys some tips that I've learned and figured out to help optimize your world to get it running at a much faster, crisper pace. I had to do this for Terminal Island. I probably spent upwards of 2 weeks trying to figure out how to get this to work perfectly. So first, there's three main ways that your world will start lagging. First is moving objects. Now, moving objects may not actually be moving at that particular moment. There's a few ways that objects can be classified as moving, and if you have enough moving objects, the game will just cease to create more objects at all, even if your game is running at a pretty decent pace. I'll get to that more later. Secondly, it could be because you have too many effects running. Effects are pretty usage heavy. As you can see here, I've got fire, and we have a lot of layers going on in this fire. We've got the little darker, I don't know, kind of smoky steam flames coming out off the ground. We have the actual flames that are coming up. We have the sparks. So yeah, effects are pretty heavy duty, and there's some effects that even do more than that, like some of the fog effects. Maybe that's not more than the fire, but if you want to cover a whole area in fog, you're going to need like 20 of those effects. So that can get pretty intensive. And third, lots of character models. Character models, in my experience, have been the most intensive objects in the world, because if you look, these character models have a lot of detail, especially for Project Spark. They're moving all the time. They have tons of moving points. It's just, there's a lot more going on with a character than, say, a logic cube. So what we're going to do is we're going to I'm going to be showing you how to optimize this. So to do this, some of the things are pretty simple. Some of them you're going to have to build your game specifically for optimization. So first, let's go into effects, because this is the easiest one. The effect is turned on and off simply by power. When it's powered off, it goes off. When it's powered on, it turns on. So what we're going to do, now first we need to establish how our character is spawned into the world. There's two good ways that I've found that your character can be spawned into a world. They can appear like this. They're in the world, they're active in the world, they're not being spawned into the world. There's also another way, which I can quickly show you how to do. You turn them into a template, and you have a logic cube that has the command once create this template. This is a spawned object for a player. This is a, I don't know, let's just call it a fixed object, as in it's always in the world all the time and it can't really be stopped. There are obviously ways to stop it, but this one only appears in the world when you tell your code to put it in the world. So if you have a main menu or something, you'll want to go with this method, just so the character only appears after you get through the menu. So depending which way you're going to do this depends on how we go about telling the world who your player is. So here, if your character is placed in the world already, then all you have to do is select that player like this. And press A, and there we go. It's not a bad idea, if you're going to do that, to go into your player and rename them to player. Don't need to be all caps. I don't know why it was all caps. Player. There we go. Okay. So that when you're looking through your code, you can definitely see that the object that you've picked, as we can tell from here, is the player. That's one way to do it. The other way, if we go into the template, is we tell the world that the global object variable of player equals me. This will now follow this line of code. So if you're going to have a game that swaps between multiple characters, you can, of course, assign different... You can change this from player to player, and the code will follow the variable, not the character model. This is also required for if you're spawning your character into the world, because you can't select a template and then have code work on the template spawned incarnations. That's just not how it works. This is the way that we have to do it if you're going to be spawning it in. This also works for this character. It would work here, but it has to be that way for if they're spawning in. But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to have everything selected, like just with the in-world picker, just like this. That's how we're going to go about it in this tutorial. So what we're going to do is, if we want things to be optimized for effects. Man, it's taking me a long time to get to the actual optimization. Sorry about all the prep. But when, we're going to go to sensors, and we're going to do objects closer than, let's do 70. You can shorten that number if you're having more and more lag or lots and lots of effects. But if you're not having that many effects, then you could lengthen that number out. And then in world picker, our player, power on. Now we're going to copy and paste this line of code. And when objects farther than 70 player, power off. So what this does is what we're doing is we're actually creating draw distance. If you've played any open world game ever, you've probably noticed draw distance. It was especially bad on the old consoles, like Xbox 360 and even Xbox Original or PlayStation 2 or something like that, where you would notice that in the distance, cars and people and vehicles and who knows what else, they would just pop in and appear. That is your draw distance. And what we're doing is we're creating our own manual draw distance. So I'm going to put a line of fire like this that extends across our little island. And this one is probably farther than 70 feet away. So we're going to give that a test. So as I walk away, you can see those effects are disappearing. But you'll also notice that when you're actually playing a game, something happening that far away, probably not going to notice it. It depends on the relevance of that effect. Like if that was a very important effect that marked a waypoint or a story objective, then maybe not use the draw distance. But if it's an effect at a campfire or an effect in the area just to make it look nice, draw distance is an excellent idea. So as you can see, the farther we get away, the distant ones start to disappear. It's hard to demonstrate how this actually helps your world because the scale that I would have to go to make this relevant would take me far too long to create for a tutorial. So, but you can see them like right. Let's see if I can, there, it's on, there it's off, there it's on, and there it's off. So right at this distance is 70 feet, and that's when that effect is going to be turning on and off. So that's how you do effects. That's the simplest one. Let's get rid of these. What we're going to be doing next is we're going to do enemies. Now, this is difficult because there's so many different ways that you guys' worlds are going to be using enemies. In my world, I have enemies that die, wait around for a while, and then respawn. I understand that a lot of your guys' worlds, when an enemy is dead, they stay dead forever. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be operating out of the idea that your enemies will be respawning. So, we're not actually going to be placing enemies in the world. We're going to be spawning the enemies in so that their spawner has control over their destiny and their fate. Let's grab a goblin, because you can't go wrong with a goblin. Here is our goblin. We are going to make him a template. There we go. We're going to have this logic cube. Let's see. How am I going to do this? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an automated respawn sequence for when the enemies are dead and are to be respawned. So spawn. When spawn is equal to true for the duration of 2 seconds in frames. So that's 2 frames. Create our enemy. Wonderful. So when this variable is true, it'll create 2 of these enemies. And then we're going to do a countdown timer for 3 in frames. Spawn equals false. So pretty much when this is equals true, it spawns 2 enemies and then becomes false again. So we're going to do once spawn equals true, just so that the enemies spawn at the beginning of the game. And then we're going to do when spawn, come on, when spawn is equal to false, we're going to have a countdown timer of a random time until they can respawn. Oh, but first, before we do that, what we're going to do is when not detect created objects. This is the thing that keeps it from spawning goblins forever. So it has to wait until it's not detecting its created objects to begin the timer to spawn more objects. So pretty much if you ran in and you killed the goblins, then the timer would begin to spawn more goblins. Or if you lured the goblins far enough away, then more of them would spawn after the random timer. Countdown timer. And we're going to make it pretty quick. Let's do 10. And then spawn equals true. Now you might be wondering why we're doing all this, because this isn't optimizing our game. This is the kind of setup that you need to optimize your game. You can't just throw the enemies into the world. So as you just saw, our enemy spawned. Let's kill him. Whew, my character's weak. There we go. They're both dead. Looks like we lured them far enough away that they began their timer pretty quickly. So it may not be in... It may be in our better interest to either increase the detect range or when not objects closer than 15 created objects. That works the same, except we get to define the detection radius. That's 15. So that works fine. This is an excellent way to have enemies that respawn over time when they're killed off. So what we're going to do is we are going to, let's see, when okay, I'm trying to remember exactly what order I need to put this in. It's been a long day, sorry. I think first we need to add a line of code to our goblins. In our goblins, when objects farther than, and this number depends on how many enemies you have in your world. If you have a ton of enemies, go with 50. If you have a few enemies, go with 80. But this is just the range that enemies can exist before they're destroyed outside of the player's existence. So we're going to go 50. And then we're going to pick our player again. And destroy me. There we go. Alright, that also could have been done from this brain by almost the exact same line of code. I'll just show you guys how to do it really quickly. When, oh, not farthest object. When objects farther than 50 are the player, then destroy created items. You see that line, that tile right there got me hung up for the better part of a week because I added this into my Terminal Island world and I forgot to throw in created objects and it ruined everything. because it kept destroying the brains themselves, the spawners, rather than their created objects. So this works the same way if you don't want to be adding too many lines of code to your enemies. We'll just go with that. We'll delete this line of code from the enemies. So now we have to allow the game to respawn the enemies. But what we're going to do is we don't want the player to want to kill the enemies, but want to go do an objective first. So he walks out of their range and then comes back in, and then he has to wait for 3 minutes or whatever the respawn time is. If they're out of this range for, let's say, 10 seconds, then we're just going to automatically put spawn equals true. So that as soon as they come back within range, then it'll just spawn them. So what we're going to do is make the spawn child line of code when, let's see, nearest object, or no, objects closer than 50 player. This code should look kind of familiar. So this spawn true will only work when it's within 50. Now, depending on how you want your world to work, you could also make this part of that child line of code so that the timer will not run if they're outside of the radius. But I usually don't do that because I want the timer to run if they killed the enemies outside of the radius. And depending on how long that timer is, you also may need to increase this timer so people don't kind of exploit the game by killing the enemy, running far away, and then running back and getting them to respawn. So that's what that's for, is that's kind of a balancing anti-exploit measure. So this is how we can get enemies to be optimized. So I'm going to copy and paste several of these blocks. And when I spawn the game, or start the game, there's going to be like a couple of frames of good lag while all these things spawn. Alright, so as you can see, only a couple of those blocks spawn, but as we walk farther that way, more and more are spawning. Which, if I was to redo that code, I'd have it say to have it spawn in the center of the logic cube, not just create in general. So as you saw, I walked too far away and all the goblins disappeared. But now let's walk backwards. Looks like we barely got within range of that one. Let's walk away. Poof. They're all disappearing. So I'll wait for a little bit outside of their range. Come back in. And they start spawning again. So I'm getting the feeling that 50 is too close. I think in Terminal Island I have it to 70 or 80 for enemies. But yeah, let's see if I can get all these enemies kind of clumped together. And then you kind of get the idea of the lag. This world's so empty that this many goblins doesn't even cause a problem. A very good resource that I would highly recommend. If you're serious about Project Spark, pick up the massive world builder pack. Don't worry, I'm not a Project Spark employee. I'm not doing this to get paid or anything like that. It's just a fantastic pack. The number one thing that it lets you do you see those metrics in the bottom right corner of my screen? Those are all showing green, which means that we are fine and dandy. Nothing is going wrong in our world. As soon as any of those start turning yellow or orange or red, you've got a problem, and it's probably going to start affecting performance. That is where I figured out the moving objects issue. Pretty much, moving objects are any object that are spawned into the world, regardless if they're moving or not. So, in my Terminal Island world, I have resources that spawn into the world randomly. Each one of those resources is technically considered a moving object. If you can see well enough, let's see if I can get a better angle or background or something. One of the middle options in my metric says moving objects, and it currently says 33. Characters, I believe, are moving objects. Objects that are spawned into the world are moving objects. Objects that were told to move for a specific amount of time are moving objects. Even if that object is no longer moving, it is considered a moving object. And when that moving objects number gets to 199, I found that the game will just stop creating new objects even when the code says it should. So to to not have moving objects, what you can do, you can use similar kind of code as I used on the goblins, so that the created objects, if it's a spawned object into the world, they are destroyed when the player gets too far away, and they're recreated when the player comes back. If it's an object that's in your world, but it has, let's say, 1 frame of movement to randomly rotate it, I had that issue too. Remove that line. Unfortunately, that does make the world look nicer when you can have those, but if you're having to balance whether the world should look nice or whether the world should function properly, go with function properly. I know that AAA game devs these days get a lot of garbage for when they tone down a game's graphics from, let's say, their E3 reveal. Looking at Witcher and Watch Dogs, I understand that. It does frustrate me because I don't think that a AAA developer should be advertising a product that they know that they can't deliver. But if a AAA developer has to make a call between making the game run smooth and making the game pretty, I always would advise the AAA developer to go with make the game run good. And so should you. Obviously, it's a little bit different because you don't get to control the polygons and the resolution of the textures and all that fun stuff, but you can control how many objects in your world. So I hope this tutorial was helpful. It helped me a ton because Terminal Island was running at about 70% speed, and then I ran all these optimizations on it, and it runs 95 plus speed. Project Spark doesn't lower its frame rate, it just makes the game run slower. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions about this, be sure to leave them in the comments below. I'll see if I can answer them. Just if you guys are interested in how my life is going, which you're probably not, but if you are, just want to say I'm just over a month into my job at Viera Wireless, where I'm a smartphone specialist. I love my job. It's a great job. The people there are awesome and funny. They're all a bunch of nerd geeks like me who just love technology. We're all nice to each other. One of my coworkers has brought in, I'm trying to think of what it was called. There were strawberries filled with cheesecake. Twice now. He's brought them in twice now. So it's awesome. Obviously the customers you get that call in are freaking weird, but it's a good job. I've gone through training in half the time that I should have because I'm learning and getting on top of the ball fast enough, which is awesome. I'm happy about that. So in the time that when I was hired, they said that in 2 months you would be starting on your own in data, and I'm just over a month in, and next Monday I'm starting on my own in data. So just a little life heads up. That and my house is going awesome. So once I finish my house, I can move in. I have super fast internet. I have the privacy of my own home. It should be a good situation for me. So thank you guys for your patience. I know I haven't been uploading a lot recently, but a lot of cool stuff is going on in my life right now, and hopefully I'll be able to upload more once I move out. So thank you guys for watching. Hope this tutorial was helpful, and I will see you guys later.